Good evening. It's Friday, September 11th. California's got it bad. The state of Oregon getting it worse. Hundreds of firefighters battling two large wildfires today that threatened to merge near the most populated part of Oregon, including the suburbs of Portland. The governor says dozens of people are missing in other parts of the state. Meanwhile, 28 major wildfires continue to burn across California, with 10 people confirmed dead in the Bear Fire, now known as the North Complex blaze, burning in the Northern California communities of Butte, Lassen, Plumas, and Yuba counties. On this 19th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, a federal judge rules that members of the Saudi royal family will have to answer questions on who planned the assault in a lawsuit brought by victims seeking damages from the plot. A bad day in the federal courts for voting rights advocates, as judges in Florida ruled that convicted felons cannot vote until they pay all the fines and restitutions assessed against them. And judges in Texas rule against expanding who is allowed to vote by mail. And a federal hearing on a challenge to Georgia's voting machines interrupted when someone begins posting video and symbols during the live Zoom session, including images from the September 11th attacks, a swastika, and pornography. From Pacifica Radio, KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, this is the Evening News. I'm Mark Miracle. Hundreds of firefighters battled two large wildfires today that threatened to merge near the most populated part of Oregon, including the suburbs of Portland. And the governor said dozens of people are missing in other parts of the state. The state's emergency management director, Andrew Phelps, said officials are preparing for a mass fatality event and that thousands of structures have been destroyed. Governor Kate Brown said more than 40,000 Oregonians have been evacuated and about 500,000 are in different levels of evacuation zones, either having been told to leave or to prepare to do so. She dialed back on a statement late yesterday issued by the State Office of Emergency Management that said 500,000 people had already been ordered to evacuate statewide. Dozens of people are missing in Jackson County in the south and Marion County, where a fire continues to burn east of Salem. Governor Brown said to a news conference today. Also today, authorities announced that a man had been arrested on 2 counts of arson for allegedly starting a fire in southern Oregon on Tuesday. The Oregon Convention Center in Portland is among the buildings being transformed into shelters for evacuees. Portland, shrouded in smoke from the fires, today had the worst air quality of the world's major cities. National Guard troops and corrections officers transferred about 1,300 inmates from a women's prison in a southern suburb of Portland out of an abundance of caution. A change in the weather, with winds dropping and shifting direction and humidity rising, greatly helped firefighters struggling to prevent the 2 fires, one burning southeast of Portland, the other east of Salem, the state capital, from advancing further west into more populated areas. Meanwhile, 28 major wildfires continue to burn across California in this year's historically destructive wildfire season. 10 people have been confirmed dead and 16 are missing due to the North Complex blaze burning in the Northern California counties of Butte, Lassen, Plumas, and Yuba. The North Complex is now the 10th most deadly wildfire in California history. KPFA's Kate Eder reports.
The mother of a 16-year-old boy who had gone missing near the North Complex blaze confirmed today that her son was killed when the inferno tore through several towns in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains this week. Jessica Williams, who had pleaded for her missing son Josiah to call her, told CBS 13 Sacramento that DNA evidence confirmed her son's death. Butte County Sheriff's Captain Derek Bell said yesterday evening that there are still more people missing due to the fire.
To date, the Butte County Sheriff's Office has responded to 124 calls for service for citizens requesting welfare checks on their loved ones or to report that they haven't heard from them. Our detectives and deputies have worked around the clock and have successfully located 98 people. We continue our ongoing efforts to locate the 16 people who remain unaccounted for at this point. It's with great sadness that we have to report an additional 7 deceased individuals were located by our deputies and detectives today. That brings the total number of lives lost in this tragic fire to 10.
The North Complex fire, which is burning near the city of Oroville, exploded earlier this week due to high winds, but has slowed down today because of smaller winds and lower temperatures caused by the smoky air. The fire has burned around 395 square miles and is 23% contained. It is now the deadliest fire of the year and the 10th deadliest in California history. Only 2 years ago, the Camp Fire killed 85 people and devastated the town of Paradise, which is only a few miles away from the current North Complex blaze. Governor Gavin Newsom toured the region, which had been devastated by the fire today.
We're in the midst of a climate emergency. We're in the midst of a climate crisis. We are experiencing weather conditions the likes of which we've never experienced in our lifetime. We're experiencing what so many people predicted decades and decades ago, but all of that now is reality. 3.154 million acres burned in the last number of months here in the state of California. Over 7,700 wildfires, 26 times more acreage burned this year in the state of California than in 2019.
Newsom said that California's 14,000 dry lightning strikes in 3 days, record-breaking temperatures, drought, and millions of dead trees are evidence that climate change has caused this year's especially destructive fire season. While touring the area, Newsom signed Assembly Bill 2147, which is meant to help incarcerated individuals in California who have worked as firefighters while serving their sentences find work afterwards as professional firefighters. According to the bill, incarcerated individuals who work as firefighters can afterwards, quote, petition to withdraw their plea of guilty and enter a plea of not guilty, end quote. Fires have burned more than 4,800 square miles across the state this year, which is more land than Rhode Island, Delaware, and Washington, D.C. combined, and the fire season is far from over. 19 people have been killed and at least 4,000 buildings burned across the state. In other parts of California, firefighters have made significant progress in containing the other large and destructive fires. CAL FIRE confirmed that the LNU complex in Sonoma, Napa, Yolo, Stanislaus, and Lake counties is now 95% contained. The SCU complex in Santa Clara, Alameda, Contra Costa, San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Merced, and San Benito counties is 98% contained. The CZU complex in Santa Cruz and San Mateo counties is now 85% contained. But the Creek Fire in Fresno and Madera counties is only 6% contained, and it has burned around 274 square miles. Newsom said that conditions may improve for firefighting in the next few days.
The good news is the winds have settled down. The good news is there's weather starting to appear offshore that will create an environment where we may get a little bit of precipitation, a modest amount of precipitation. In a perverse reality, with all this smoke, it cools the temperatures down, the smoke blanketing now the state of California. It actually advantages some of our efforts in terms of mitigating the spread.
The LNU lightning complex is the 20th most deadly fire in California history. Smoke from the Northern California fires has blanketed the Bay Area in an orange haze for the past few days. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District lists the air quality in much of the Bay Area as very unhealthy. According to IQ Air, San Francisco is currently one of the top 3 cities with the worst air quality in the world. Reporting for KPFA Pacifica Radio, I'm Kate Ida.
More details on the bill that Governor Newsom signed into law today, giving California's inmate firefighters a shot at becoming professional firefighters once they complete their sentences. The new law will allow state and county inmates who train as firefighters to seek to erase the criminal records that often are a bar to employment as firefighters or in other professions. The measure, Newsom said, will give prisoners hope of actually getting a job in the profession that they've been trained in. California has been struggling in recent years to field enough inmate firefighters because of changes in state law that have reduced the number of lower-level offenders in state prisons. Court rulings also ended some of the incentives for inmates to risk their lives fighting fires when they could earn similar early release credits with less dangerous duties. And the shortage grew this year as thousands more inmates were released early in a bid to slow the spread of the coronavirus through the prisons, pushing the number of inmate firefighters down about 30% from last year. The new law may create a new incentive by allowing former inmate firefighters, after their release, to ask a judge to withdraw their plea of guilty. The judge could opt to then dismiss the accusations. The measure excludes those convicted of certain violent felonies and sex offenses, and the ex-offender would still have to disclose the conviction if he or she applies to become a teacher. The expungement would give the former firefighters the ability to apply for any of more than 200 occupations in California that require a state license, an opportunity lost to most people with criminal records. Commemorations today of the 19th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. Simon Marks filed this report.
James Joseph Carson, Jr.
Christopher Mikhail Kostingen.
Angeline C. Carter.
James Marcel Cartier.
It's a solemn day here in the United States, the 19th anniversary of the attacks of September the 11th, 2001. An opportunity to honor the 2,977 people who perished that day when Al-Qaeda terrorists flew hijacked planes into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York, the Pentagon here in Washington, and a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The planned target for that fourth jet has never been fully established. President Trump paid tribute to the dead there today.
Today, every heartbeat in America is wedded to yours. Your pain and anguish is the shared grief of our whole nation. The heroes of Flight 93 are an everlasting reminder that no matter the danger, no matter the threat, no matter the odds, America will always rise up, stand tall, and fight back.
The bells tolling there and tolling all over the country for the victims of the September 11th attacks. America's presidential candidates have put their cudgels down for the day. Simon Marks reporting.
At the ceremony in New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio called on citizens to remember the spirit of togetherness and unity that the city displayed on that notorious day 19 years ago.
On that horrible day, we never could have imagined this moment in history. But I think those heroes we lost would tell us to, once again, believe in New York City, believe in each other, and move forward.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. A judge has ruled that two members of the royal family in Saudi Arabia will have to answer questions about who planned the September 11th terror attacks in what lawyers for victims call a turning point in a long-running lawsuit. U.S. Magistrate Judge Sarah Netburn ordered Saudi Arabia to make the pair and other Saudi witnesses available for depositions in the suit brought by victims seeking billions of dollars in damages. The ruling was unsealed late yesterday. A federal prosecutor who was helping lead the investigation into the origins of the Trump-Russia probe has resigned from the Justice Department. Nora Danahy was a top prosecutor on a team led by U.S. Attorney John Durham of Connecticut, who was appointed by Attorney General William Barr last year to lead an investigation into how the FBI and other federal agencies set out to investigate Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election and whether the Trump campaign had coordinated with the Kremlin, and whether there was enough evidence to warrant such an investigation. A spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Connecticut has confirmed Danahy's departure, declined to comment further. The Hartford Courant newspaper first reported Danahy's resignation. It's widely expected that Durham's report will be released before the November election in order to boost President Trump's re-election chances. You're listening to the Evening News in KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online, kpfa.org. A federal hearing on a challenge to Georgia's voting machines was interrupted today when someone began posting video and symbols during the live Zoom session, including images from the September 11th attacks, a swastika, and pornography. Before the interruption, there were roughly 100 people signed in as participants and observers to the high-profile hearing. During testimony by a voting machine company executive, at least two people, one with the username Osama, began posting rapidly changing videos and still images, some accompanied by music. By sharing their screens with the video conference, the court quickly ended the Zoom session. It resumed via Zoom about an hour later with a virtual waiting room set up, so the participants and observers had to be admitted by the court staff. A member of the court staff was designated to share exhibits sent by attorneys and to unmute people who needed to speak. The hearing in the long-running fight over Georgia's voting machines began yesterday afternoon and continued today. Election integrity activists and individual voters who filed the lawsuit say Georgia's voting machines are unaccountable and unverifiable and have security vulnerabilities resulting in an unconstitutional burden on the right to vote. They've asked U.S. District Judge Amy Totenberg to order the state to use hand-marked paper ballots for the November election. Despite a federal judge's ruling blocking the U.S. Census Bureau from winding down the 2020 census for the time being, supervisors in at least one California census office have been instructed to make plans for laying off census takers. The email was sent out on Wednesday, just days after a judge ordered the Census Bureau to stop winding up operations until at least next week. Meanwhile, in Washington, the House Committee on Oversight and Reform held a hearing this week on the need for legislative action to extend the statutory deadlines for the census in light of the coronavirus pandemic. KPFA's Emma Herdman reports.
The House committee focused on providing the Census Bureau with sufficient time to produce a complete and accurate 2020 census. The once-a-decade head count of every U.S. resident helps determine how $1.5 trillion in federal funding is distributed and how many congressional seats each state gets in a process known as apportionment. Chairwoman Carolyn B. Maloney speaks to the importance of an accurate census.
If you support full funding for your state, if you support providing your constituents with health care, well-funded schools, hospitals, even road and bridge repair, then you should support these extensions. An undercount will directly harm states and therefore people across this country, including states with large populations who vote Republican. An undercount will reduce the amount of funding these states are entitled to receive for health care, education, and transportation.
Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Census Bureau pushed back ending the count from the end of July to the end of October and asked Congress to extend the deadline for turning in the apportionment numbers from December, as required by law, into next spring. When the Republican-controlled Senate failed to take up the request, the Bureau was forced to create a revised schedule that had the census ending in September. Former Census Bureau Director John Thompson warns that a loss of a whole month, or 30% of the previously allotted time, to follow up with folks who have not yet responded to the census has devastating consequences. He says that going forward with the September 30th census end date will cause the Census Bureau to rely on administrative records to estimate census numbers, which he says are not representative of immigrant and minority communities. Those who support the September 30th census count end date, like Republican Kentucky Congress member James Comer, say that extending the deadline for the 2020 census is a partisan attempt by Democrats to undermine democracy. Here's Congressmember Comer.
In July, President Trump took a very important step to ensure the sanctity of our nation's elections and equal representation under our Constitution. The President directed the Secretary of Commerce to report an apportionment count for the House of Representatives, which excludes non-legal residents in the United States, including illegal immigrants. All Americans should care about who is being included in the apportionment count. Including illegal immigrants in the count for representation in Congress only dilutes the representation for all Americans who vote in elections and makes a mockery of our basic principle of one person, one vote.
A federal court ruled this week that President Trump's order to exclude undocumented people from the census is unlawful. Populations that are most at risk of going uncounted are communities of color. North Carolina Counts Coalition Executive Director Stacey Carlis says that the communities in North Carolina and across the U.S. that have low self-response rates have a higher population that identify as Black, Latinx, or American Indian. Other factors that contribute to low response rates are low internet access, households with children under 5, and college and military communities. Chairman of the Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, Maryland Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin, says that it's vital, especially in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, to extend the census deadline.
As of yesterday, at least 15% of households in 10 different states had not been counted. That doesn't seem like much, perhaps, but if 15 to 20% of people in all those states aren't counted, more than 12 million Americans will be missed. Many people don't realize how crucial the census is to our COVID-19 response and the ability of governments to meet the needs of the people. The CARES Act, which established the $150 billion coronavirus relief fund, required that the money be distributed to states based on census population data. Countless studies tracking the prevalence of the disease in the country have relied on census tract data, and our fine-grained understanding of the disproportionate impact on communities of color across America is also based on census data.
Earlier this month, the Census Bureau argued in federal litigation that there's a high likelihood of, quote, irreparable harm, unquote, as a result of inaccurate census data. The judge issued a temporary restraining order prohibiting the Commerce Department and Census Bureau from implementing the shortened sentence schedule until a September 17th court hearing. I'm Emma Herdman for KPFA News.
A federal appeals court ruled today in a case that could have broad implications for the November elections that Florida felons must pay all fines, restitution, and legal fees before they can regain their right to vote. Reversing a lower court judge's decision that gave Florida felons the right to vote regardless of outstanding legal obligations, the order from the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the position of Republican Governor Ron DeSantis and the Republican-led state legislature, leaving voting rights activists aghast. Under Amendment 4, which Florida voters passed overwhelmingly in 2018, felons who have completed their sentences would have voting rights restored. The legal dispute arose after lawmakers the next year moved to define what it means to complete a sentence. In addition to prison time served, lawmakers directed that all legal financial obligations, including unpaid fines and restitution, would also have to be settled before a felon could be eligible to vote. The appeals court agreed with the Republican lawmakers, a decision that voting rights advocates called an affirmation of a pay-to-vote system that primarily disenfranchises minorities and poor people. The ruling runs counter to the foundational principle that Americans do not have to pay to vote, said Julie Ebenstein, senior staff attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union's Voting Rights Project. She said the gravity of this decision cannot be overstated. It is an affront to the spirit of democracy. The decision came on a 6-4 vote. 4 judges dissenting. They argued in part that it is sometimes extremely difficult for returning felons to even know what outstanding financial obligations they may still have, and that at the very least, the state should create a mechanism to provide them with that information. A federal appeals court dealt another blow to vote by mail. Advocates in Texas, pushed by the state's Democrats and some voters to allow mail balloting during the coronavirus pandemic, had been upheld by a federal district judge, but a divided 3-judge panel of the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals vacated that ruling late yesterday. The panel rejected an argument that the vote by mail statute in Texas discriminates on the basis of age. That argument was based on the law allowing people ages 65 and over to vote by mail, but not younger voters unless they have a disability or other specified reason for casting an absentee ballot. Voters in West Virginia must now go online to request an application for an absentee ballot. Critics of the system say it's tougher for older voters and those without internet access. Diane Bernard has the story.
The ACLU is calling on West Virginia's Secretary of State to automatically mail absentee voter applications, as was done for the June primary. As it stands now, for the November election, voters must, for the first time in the state's election history, access the voting application through an online portal to receive one by mail. According to Dijon Stokes with the ACLU of West Virginia, he says that's a concern because many West Virginians don't have broadband access.
That creates a bigger problem of internet access and then people's access to information, which is why we're asking the Secretary of State's office to send out those absentee ballot applications again, which they can do and which certain counties, like Lincoln County, are already doing.
He notes his organization met with Secretary of State Mac Warner, who says he's leaving it up to county clerks to make the decision whether to send out absentee ballot applications. The website for registration information or an absentee ballot request is sos.wv.gov. Even though the pandemic makes absentee voting more critical for older folks, fewer than 5% of West Virginia registered voters have applied for absentee ballots since they became available last month. Stokes says Warner thought the cost for the state to mail applications for the primary, about $900,000, was too prohibitive to do again. But Stokes thinks the state should be looking out for its aging population instead of focusing on the cost.
These are people who want to participate in the political process. And for most people, voting is the one time they get a chance to participate in their government, to actually make a decision within their government. So we don't feel like people should have to risk their lives or even think about risking their lives to vote.
County clerks will begin mailing out absentee ballots on September 18th to those who have requested them, and they can be returned by mail if postmarked by Election Day. The last day to apply for an absentee ballot in the Mountain State is October 28th. Support for this reporting was provided by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. For Public News Service, I'm Diane Bernard.
You're listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno online, kpfa.org. It's an hour-long newscast, airs each night at 6, half-hour editions at 6 o'clock on the weekends, and it's always available to you 24 hours a day. It's archived online at kpfa.org. I'm Mark Miracle. The House Ways and Means Subcommittee today brought public policy experts in to testify on the economic hardship endured by working families in the country as a consequence of political inaction in Washington on new COVID-19 relief legislation. KPFA's Chris Lee reports.
According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a staggering 13.6 million people are still unemployed. Representative Mike Thompson, Democrat from Northern California and chair of the Ways and Means Subcommittee, says 94% of jobs in the financial services sector have returned since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, but other industries have been slow to recover.
According to census data for July, 13 million adults couldn't pay their rent. 29 million adults sometimes or often didn't have enough to eat over the past week. And 1 in 3 kids did not get enough to eat because the household couldn't afford it. Think about that. 1 in 3 kids not getting enough to eat because their families can't afford to feed them.
Overall, hunger has doubled during the pandemic, according to Hunger Free America. Thompson says the tax provisions included in the last coronavirus stimulus bill, the CARES Act, which was signed into law back in March, helped tens of millions of Americans keep their housing, feed their children, pay their bills, and hold on to their health insurance in the midst of a global public health crisis. However, the struggle against the pandemic is far from over, and while the economic crisis continues to crush millions of Americans, Thompson says the Senate has done virtually nothing to help them. Economist Dr. Betsy Stevenson warns that without federal intervention, America faces a long and grueling economic recovery.
We've lost roughly 400,000 businesses, and that hemorrhaging of businesses has not stopped. Underneath the return to work, there's been growing permanent job loss. Permanent job loss is much harder to reverse than a temporary layoff. Without further action on your part, American families will continue to suffer, and the rest of the recovery will take years to complete. Let me emphasize, years to complete, and it's possible we will not return to our pre-pandemic potential trajectory for decades.
Stevenson adds that as a mother, she worries that the COVID-19 pandemic will have a lasting impact on children whose parents currently face the impossible decision of either going to work to pay for essentials or staying home to look after their kids. She says tax provisions like the child tax credit included in the HEROES Act, the coronavirus stimulus bill, which passed the House back in May, would help strengthen low-income households. Nakota Long is the head of one such household. She says she's never made more than $30,000 a year, despite earning a master's degree.
I was unexpectedly laid off from my temporary job in late March 2020. Devastated, I went into panic mode, survival mode, thinking of what I needed to do. What could I sell that would cut back and keep my family afloat? Like millions of families, I anxiously waited to see if there would be any financial relief coming for people who had lost their jobs. A lifeline, the CARES Act, allowed me to apply and receive unemployment compensations to North Carolina, and I was approved for the federal unemployment boost. This was a lifesaver in an ocean of uncertainty. With this additional financial help, I received $823 weekly. I could keep my family safe, and now we could comply with federal and state stay-at-home mandates.
Long reports that she is now working at Amazon, but she worries about contracting COVID-19 and spreading it to her family, and is facing possible eviction. According to the Aspen Institute, an estimated 30 to 40 million people are currently on the brink of eviction. I'm Chris Lee, reporting for KPFA.
Despite a nationwide moratorium against evictions, people are losing their homes, and the order has created conflicts between landlords and tenants. Ross Brown reports.
Millions of Americans are unemployed, but some landlords worry renters are using the pandemic as an excuse to stop paying rent, and they'll never see back payments. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has ordered a halt to pandemic-related evictions through the end of the year for people earning less than $99,000 a year. Jay Malone with the Texas Gulf Coast Area Labor Federation encourages renters to cooperate with landlords when possible.
You still owe the rent ultimately, but a lot of people need time to find a new job, to find sustainable income,
income that will allow them to pay back the rent.
Those seeking relief from eviction must confirm they've attempted to get available government housing assistance and are unable to pay rent due to substantial loss of household income, a layoff, or extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses. Renters also must show that being evicted would require them to live with others or become homeless and make partial payments based on ability. Prior to the CDC nationwide moratorium, Houston was the largest city in the country without eviction protections during the pandemic. Renters make up more than half Houston's population. Malone says too often renters become homeless because they don't know their legal rights.
We think that well over half of everyone who leaves a home is a self-eviction. They leave without going through the legal process.
After the eviction of a young family in Houston last week was televised showing a tearful father, law enforcement officers set up a GoFundMe campaign that has raised more than $100,000 to help the family and other families facing eviction. Israel Rodriguez told reporters he was behind thousands of dollars in rent after losing his job due to the pandemic. For Public News Service, I'm Roz Brown.
The number of daily U.S. deaths from the coronavirus is declining again after peaking in early August. But scientists warn that a new bout with the disease this fall could claim even more lives. Experts say the arrival of cooler weather and the likelihood of more indoor gatherings will add to the importance of everyday safety precautions like wearing masks, staying home, and washing hands. The U.S. has seen two distinct peaks in daily deaths. The nation's summertime surge crested at about half the size of the first deadly wave, which arrived in April. That's when deaths first peaked at an average of about 2,200 fatalities each day. California's typical turnaround time for coronavirus tests has dropped to less than 2 days. State health officials said that level allows for effective isolation and the quarantine of those who are infected to limit the spread of the virus. Health officials said 2/3 of the test results are now available within 1 day and nearly 90% within 2 days. That's down from as many as 7 business days last month. Improvements in capacity and turnaround will allow the state to soon begin what is commonly called surveillance testing. In Washington, senators held a hearing this week to question 2 of the nation's top doctors on the state of vaccine development for the novel coronavirus. KPFA's Noah Litwer reports.
In order to develop COVID-19 herd immunity, where the virus effectively stops spreading, scientists agree that about 75% of Americans will need to develop antibodies to the virus, through vaccination or otherwise. With that in mind, senators from the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions summoned Dr. Francis Collins, Director of the National Institute of Health, and Vice Admiral Jerome Adams, Surgeon General of the United States, to address lawmakers on the vaccine development process. During the hearing, several senators highlighted the role that national politics is playing on the public's perception of the vaccine development program. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts took direct aim at the Trump administration.
The president has accused FDA officials of being deep state operatives. He's tweeted conspiracy theories about COVID-19 deaths, and he has implicitly tied vaccine development to his re-election campaign. If Americans who are watching all of this hesitate to take the vaccine because of what he has done, does that help us get to the levels we need to be able to create herd immunity?
Earlier this week, a poll was conducted by YouGov, asking thousands of Americans what they would do if a coronavirus vaccine became available at no cost. The results? Just 21% of respondents said they would get one as soon as possible, while 79% said they were either skeptical or strongly opposed to receiving a vaccine. Addressing the outsized role that partisanship and misinformation has played in forming public opinions on the vaccine, Dr. Collins spoke on the importance of ramping up public health messaging based on the facts that are clear and available to the average person.
We're going to have to work really hard, though, in the coming weeks and months to get the facts out there about how the decisions are going to get made and how once we have, and I hope we will by the end of 2020, at least one safe and effective vaccine, what is the evidence that anybody would want to look at in making their own decision? Discounting whatever political words they heard, whatever conspiracy theories popped up in their Facebook feed, and actually saying, okay, let's see what the doctors say.
So far, The Trump administration has allocated billions of dollars in public funds to supporting the clinical trials of 7 vaccine producers. However, little to no resources have been invested in public awareness campaigns aimed at encouraging vaccination and countering conspiracy theories circulating the internet. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which has historically conducted public health messaging campaigns, appears to have been sidelined in this respect. Vice Admiral Adams said that he wanted the public to trust the quality of the scientific process guiding the vaccine development program. He emphasized the importance of political independence and nonpartisanship on this issue.
We need to encourage people to stop attacking the process. There's a lot of politics going on here. People don't like one party or the other, or one person or the other. The process is strong, and Dr. Collins and I have been adamant that we want people to understand there are protections built in. The process is strong. If we follow the process and people understand the process, they will have confidence. But everyone out there who says, I won't take this vaccine if, or I don't trust this vaccine unless, is instilling further hesitancy and hurting us.
Adams did say that he's been in communication with social media influencers, such as celebrities like Kylie Jenner, and faith leaders across the country to help promote a coronavirus vaccine once a candidate becomes available. Reporting from Oakland, California, this is Noah Litwer.
San Francisco health officials will allow gyms, barbershops, hair and nail salons, as well as massage services to operate indoors again with limits starting on Monday. The announcement regarding the COVID-19 restriction update was made by Mayor London Breed, along with the city's top health official, Dr. Grant Colfax, and the Economic Recovery Task Force. Breed reminded city residents to stay the course and to follow local health officials' guidelines in order to get on track back to normalcy, including having children back in school for in-person education and to help the devastated economy by adhering to face mask and social distancing measures in the meantime. After several months of a strict lockdown, the Navajo Nation has begun to report a significant reduction in the number of deaths from COVID-19. Christine Trudeau reports.
Twice within a matter of days, the Navajo Nation marked a significant milestone that the nation's largest reservation hasn't seen since March. It's all the more important as the tribe continues to climb toward a total number that nears 10,000 COVID-19 deaths. The nation once outpaced every state in the country for the number of deaths from the disease. Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez called it good news, but cautioned the numbers will continue to fluctuate until there is an effective vaccine. Nez encouraged citizens not to get discouraged by the fluctuation, but to stay on top of practicing all healthcare expert-recommended safety measures, and reminded that it's due to sticking to these measures that new case numbers have dropped. In addition to remaining vigilant, Navajo Nation Council Delegate Amber Kinesba-Crotty says the council continue to push Navajo Nation programs for a dramatic increase to funds and resources for every community across Navajo Nation. Navajo Nation health officials originally reported no new cases for a day, but that was later corrected to add 12 additional cases. Following Labor Day weekend gatherings, another spike in case numbers is expected. Another 32-hour partial weekend lockdown will go into effect starting Saturday. I'm Christine Trudeau.
Households in England's second city, Birmingham, were being urged to stop socializing with others beginning today as part of a dramatic tightening of coronavirus restrictions in the wake of a sharp spike in new confirmed cases in the United Kingdom. Amid mounting evidence of increasing transmission rates across the UK, the mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, said tougher restrictions on household mixing in Birmingham and the nearby boroughs of Solihull and Sandwell were necessary in light of a big local increase in virus cases. Though the ban formally comes into effect on Tuesday, Street advised affected residents to avoid household mixing before then, as it's been identified as one of the drivers of transmission. And Street said younger people have to take responsibility, since the biggest growth in cases is among those below the age of 40. He also said that the restrictions don't apply to schools, workplaces, or transportation. Stuart Smith has more from London.
As the whole country braces for the introduction of new, stricter rules on Monday, evidence suggests the country is now seeing exponential growth in infections. The rise is particularly clear in the north of England and among younger people. The number of cases is still much lower than the peak of the pandemic in April, but as the UK's infection rate rises exponentially, schools and universities continue to reopen, which some epidemiologists say could boost the rate of infection even higher. Stuart Smith, London.
India edged closer to recording nearly 100,000 coronavirus cases in 24 hours, and it ordered retesting of many people whose first results were from a less reliable testing method than the one being widely used. According to the Health Ministry, India recorded another spike of more than 96,000 cases in the past 24 hours, taking its caseload to 4.56 million. It also reported today another 1,209 deaths, taking total fatalities to 76,271. Ishan Garg has more from New Delhi.
Despite the caseload rising, the government is poised to relax restrictions on movement. It says the economic cost of the pandemic is unbearable, and with proper precautions, people must return to business as usual. India's recorded the worst ever economic contraction in history recently, and the unemployment figures are steadily rising. Experts say as the situation on the economic front worsens, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's popularity could start to wane, which is why the government is committed to bringing activity in India back to pre-COVID levels. But many are still concerned that the rise in infections could force sporadic lockdowns in the country, making it hard for businesses to function. Ishan Garg, New Delhi.
And you're listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Edwards-Teekert.
And I'm Kat Brooks.
Weekday mornings we host Upfront.
2 hours of conversation about what's in the news and what should be.
Politics, technology.
Prisons, police.
What's happening in City Hall and at the State House.
In Washington and in the streets.
That's starting at 7 a.m. right after Democracy Now!
On Upfront.
Authorities said today about 8,800 unaccompanied children have been quickly expelled from the United States along the Mexican border under a pandemic-related measure that effectively ended the granting of asylum in this country. The Trump administration has expelled nearly 160,000 people since the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention emergency order took effect in March, a figure that also includes more than 7,600 adults and children who crossed the border in families. The figures on children were reported for the first time in a declaration by Raul Ortiz, the Border Patrol's deputy chief, as part of the administration's appeal of a court order to stop housing children in hotels. The administration asked the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco to overturn a ruling handed down last week that found the use of hotels skirted fundamental humanitarian projections and protections. U.S. District Judge Dolly Gee in Los Angeles ruled that using hotels for long-term detention violates a 2-decade-old settlement governing the treatment of children in custody. She ordered border agencies to stop placing children in hotels by next Tuesday. As the coronavirus itself continues to spread throughout America, COVID-19 scams do too. Mary Sherman reports.
More than 194,000 complaints related to COVID-19 and stimulus payments have been submitted to the Federal Trade Commission, including roughly 1,200 fraud complaints and 400 identity theft complaints from Missouri. Chris Thetford with the Better Business Bureau in St. Louis says con artists have their finger on the pulse and are always adapting their schemes to match what's making headlines.
What might have started back in March with places claiming that they could sell you personal protective equipment or things that they claimed would help keep you from being infected with COVID, then morph into things like the contact tracing scam and the government imposter scam.
Thetford shares some general rules to avoid becoming a victim. Never wire money to a person you don't know, and never give your Social Security number, bank account, or any other personal information over the phone or through email. A popular scam involves a person claiming to be from a government agency who says they need personal information to send a stimulus payment. Thetford says they're also hearing from Missourians who've been called by someone claiming to be a contact tracer who digs for personal information.
If you get a legitimate contact tracing call, they're going to ask you things about your activities over a certain period of time and things like that, but they're not going to ask you for personal identifying information, which could then be used to steal your identity and create a new credit profile.
Suspected cases of fraud can be reported to the Missouri Attorney General's office. Thetford adds, complaints can also be reported to the Better Business Bureau at bbb.org/scam tracker.
You can read about what others living right around you are encountering, and it gives you the option if somebody reaches out to you to try to make you a victim of a scam, you can report that so that your neighbors can know that that is going on as well.
In about half of fraud cases reported to the FTC, the victim lost money, with the median fraud loss in Missouri topping $258. For Public News Service, I'm Mary Sherman.
Prosecutors in the case of 4 former Minneapolis police officers charged in the death of George Floyd say the men should face trial together because the evidence and charges against them are similar. But defense attorneys have argued for separate trials, saying they are likely to offer antagonistic defenses. The former officers appeared in court today for a hearing on the prosecution's request to hold a joint trial and other issues. Judge Peter Cahill took those issues under advisement. Is expected to rule at a later date. Floyd, who was African-American, died May 25th after Derek Chauvin pressed his knee against his neck. The roughly 17,000 fans of the Kansas City Chiefs allowed into Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City for a masked and socially distanced start to the pro football season opener last night found themselves thrust into the middle of the nationwide discussion about social injustice. The Super Bowl champions had already prohibited fans from wearing headdresses or war paint amid a push for more cultural sensitivity. And along with the National Football League, the Chiefs had planned a series of videos and other on-field demonstrations in the lead-up to the NFL season that were designed to highlight systemic racism and social injustice. But it was the response by some fans during the national anthem that lit up social media as the game played out. The Houston, Texas football team remained in the locker room during the national anthem, and fans booed them when they emerged from the tunnel at its conclusion. The booing continued as the two teams walked to midfield and shook hands, their interlocked arms stretched from one end zone to the other during what was supposed to be a moment of silence during their demonstration of unity. Nationwide calls to address racial issues have become more prevalent since George Floyd died at the hands of Minneapolis police May 25th, and protests have continued to grip the nation. The move to rein in Native American imagery by the Chiefs had been seen as a good first step, but it also has frustrated some of the franchise's long-standing fans, including some who were in the stands last night, as the team became the first to take the field in front of a crowd, albeit a smaller than normal one during the coronavirus pandemic. Antonia Gonzalez has more.
Demonstrators held change the name signs outside the Kansas City football team stadium Thursday night as fans attended the NFL season opener. Galen Krauser, executive director of the Kansas City Indian Center, is among a Native coalition calling for the end of Indian mascots.
When nobody's out here protesting against it, people just assume that everybody's okay with it. And it seems like here lately, I hear a lot of the, well, how come you're just now saying something? Even though we've been saying something for decades.
The team has banned fans from wearing headdresses and Indian-themed face paint into the stadium and is reviewing the Arrowhead chop, but fans clearly motioned the chop throughout Thursday's game. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
As a summer of protests over racial discrimination comes to a close, South Asian groups are fighting for recognition of a similar phenomenon that they face, discrimination based on caste. Suzanne Potter reports.
Caste apartheid is a centuries-old system of oppression common in India and surrounding regions that divides people into 5 categories, ranging from the favored Brahmin caste down to the Dalits, formerly known as untouchables. Thanmuri Sundararajan with the Dalit civil rights group Equality Labs recently published an op-ed in Yes magazine on the hatred that affects 5 million South Asian Americans.
We have been seeing many people in caste-oppressed communities struggling with violence and discrimination and slurs. And, we left behind our homelands to escape caste apartheid. And so to see it rear its ugly head here is intolerable and also against the law.
In June, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing launched a civil rights case alleging that the tech company Cisco failed to protect a Dalit employee who suffered slurs and lost promotions when his caste status became known. A study on caste discrimination commissioned by Equality Labs found that here in the U.S., 1 in 4 Dalits has suffered physical violence, 1 in 3 has encountered discrimination in school, and 2 out of 3 have felt it at the office. Sundararajan says it's time for caste to be recognized as a protected civil rights category within companies and at the local, state, and federal level.
So this is a very significant moment in this new terrain of civil rights because we are seeing caste-oppressed Americans all across the United States asking for protections.
Advocates are also calling on Senator and Vice Presidential candidate Kamala Harris, who is from the Brahmin caste, to denounce caste-based discrimination. This story was produced with original reporting from Thanmuri Sundararajan for Yes Media. For Public News Service, I'm Suzanne Potter.
Bahrain today agreed to normalize relations with Israel, becoming the latest Arab nation to do so as part of a broader diplomatic push by President Donald Trump and his administration to further ease Israel's isolation in the Middle East and find common ground with nations that share U.S. hostility to Iran. Trump announced the agreement on the 19th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, following a phone call he had with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Bahrain's King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifi. The 3 leaders also issued a brief joint statement, marking the second such Arab normalization agreement with Israel in the past 2 months.
I think nobody thought this was going to happen so quickly after the first, but they'll both be here on Tuesday. They're going to be signing.
The announcement came less than a week before Trump hosts a White House ceremony to mark the establishment of full relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, something that Trump and his Middle East team brokered in August. Bahrain's foreign minister will attend that event and sign a separate agreement with Netanyahu. Today's agreement is another diplomatic win for Trump, less than 2 months before the presidential election, and an opportunity to shore up support among pro-Israel evangelical Christians. In addition to the UAE deal, Trump just last week announced agreements in principle for Kosovo to recognize Israel and for Serbia to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It's a setback for Palestinian leaders who have urged Arab nations to withhold recognition until they have secured an independent state. The Palestinians, however, have seen a steady erosion in once unified Arab support, one of the few cards they still held as leverage against Israel since Trump began pursuing an unabashedly pro-Israeli agenda. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was in Doha, Qatar today for peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban. Talks scheduled to begin tomorrow. Negotiations were laid out in a peace deal Washington brokered with the Taliban and signed in Doha in February, aimed at ending the war and bringing U.S. troops home, ending America's longest conflict. Trump made the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan a promise before the 2016 presidential election. In the run-up to this year's November's presidential election, Washington has ramped up pressure to start intra-Afghan negotiations. This was, Trump said, expected to draw down U.S. troops by 4,000 by the month of November. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District today extended again its Spare the Air alert for wildfire smoke through Monday, September 14th. That will mark the 26th, 27th, and 28th consecutive Spare the Air alerts called. San Francisco will be experiencing clouds tomorrow morning, and it should clear by the afternoon for sunny skies, then highs in the upper 60s tomorrow. Further inland, highs in the upper 80s under sunny skies. In the central San Joaquin Valley tomorrow, sunny with highs in the low to mid 80s. Sunny in Los Angeles, highs in the mid 80s.
This is a community announcement for September 2020. Yoga and Qigong instructor Amelia Barilli continues to offer a free 1-hour workshop via Zoom every Saturday. These workshops are designed to de-stress as well as boost and balance the immune system. The Spanish language workshop is at 11 a.m. The English language workshop is at 3 p.m. The Zoom link is posted on her site at ameliabarilli.com. She also has health information on her YouTube channel, The New Paradigms. This community announcement is produced by the First Voice Apprenticeship Program. Please send your event for consideration to calendar@kpfa.org. To hear this announcement again, call 510-848-6767, extension 621, or view it online at kpfa.org.